Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Could lake monsters originate from deep within the earth? How could unknown giant creatures remain undetected in 2022? What is the orang pendek? Hello, and welcome to the 961st edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON, AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal app from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and I am flying solo today because my dad took a little trip off with my mom. They're off on a grand excursion, hopefully to be back relatively soon. And today we welcome back the Indiana Jones of cryptozoology, and that would be none other than Richard Freeman, who is a globe-trotting zoologist who works as a full-time cryptozoologist, searching for and writing about unknown animals. For many years, he has been on the trail of such critters as the Sasquatch or Yeti, the Mongolian deathworm, one of my personal favorites, the giant anaconda, the Niki Nanka, geez, mouthful of words, and the orang pendek, which is much easier to say, and the gull. The author of 8 books that I know of anyway, unless there are more, Richard, and or if there are more coming down the pipeline.
I've just finished writing another one called The Highest Strangeness, which is a bit of a departure for me because it's not pure cryptozoology. It's all forms of Forteana, and it's about the very, very high strangeness cases in all areas of Forteana. That should be out next year.
Oh, well, fair enough. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but Richard is also the zoological director at the Centre for Fortean Zoology in Devonshire, England, the world's only full-time mystery animal research organization, I should add. Richard has lectured widely and makes frequent media appearances. He is featured as one of the greats in our own book, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard Of, published in 2017. So, Richard Freeman, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with me on this fun solo journey. So I guess we'll begin with some of the creatures that I mentioned in your bio, and we all know about Sasquatch and Yeti, but what is the one that I had trouble pronouncing, which is the Niki Nanka? Have you seen it? What is your experience? What is it?
It's a dragon-like beast said to inhabit the swamps of the Gambia in West Africa, and I thought initially when I went over it could be similar to the Mekelian Bembe, which I think may be a gigantic semi-aquatic monitor lizard. But when I actually got to the Gambia, I found it was a much more folkloric creature. People would say, a great hunter from my village once saw it and he died. If you see it, you're supposed to die within 5 years. And it's an omen of death. Anything bad gets blamed on the Niki Nanka, pollution events, outbreaks of disease, road accidents. And we only met one person that claimed to have seen it, and his description was so fantastical and huge of this Godzilla-sized creature crawling out of a hole in a swamp. We pretty much concluded that it's a demonization of a pre-Islamic python cult, because many African societies venerated different animals, crocodiles, lions, hyenas, and pythons, and we think it may be that when Islam came in and took over in West Africa, the old religions were demonized, and the python deity became this demonic dragon-like creature, Niki Nanka, of the swamp.
That's really interesting because something similar kind of happened in Europe as well, right? You know, Christianity came in, and a lot of the old gods were either reappropriated or they were turned into sort of these fantastical monsters. And the first thing that kind of comes to mind is, the dragon, right? And it's interesting, and I want to expand a little bit on this before we move on to our next suspect here. You mentioned folkloric monsters. Now, there's sort of a dichotomy here, right? So folkloric versus, let's say, flesh and blood, right? Where is the line between something that's folkloric versus, let's say, like, a Sasquatch or a Yeti?
Well, it's a good question, and the line is blurred. Because with something like dragons, they're truly universal. rightly the kings and great-great-grandfathers of all monsters. Dragon lore has been traced back to sub-Saharan Africa over 40,000 years ago, and they appear in every single continent and culture on Earth, from the Australian Aborigines right up to the north of Russia, everywhere. In Britain alone, there's over 100 dragon legends in Britain alone. And there are still claimed sightings of dragons and dragon-like creatures today. Linda Godfrey, in her book American Monsters, talks of a dragon sighting from Wisconsin. I think it was in 2012, a multiple witness sighting of a classic dragon. 4 legs, 2 wings, scaly skin, breathing fire. It's obvious these things can't be flesh and blood animals that are living in our world all the time, because they'd turn up on radar, they'd be attacking planes, but people would see them more often.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like the dragon legend has multiple strings to it, and multiple. There's not one answer to it, but it's a melange of different things. Now, some of these things could be interdimensional. They could exist in other planes or other dimensions, and they just enter our world under certain circumstances for a short time, or we enter their world for a short time. So we're a visible creature for a short time. Very interestingly, I've been told independently by about 3 different Muslim people, they believe in creatures called jinn, where we get the word genie from. And these are creatures that are supposed to be made out of smokeless fire, which you could translate as energy. And usually we can't see them, and they can't see us. But in certain circumstances, they can see us and we can see them. And there's stories of people slipping through into the world of jinn, or the jinn entering our world. Now, interestingly, the jinn are supposed to come in a number of forms. They can manifest as dragons, huge hairy apes, monstrous black dogs, huge cats, or monstrous birds. And these all tie in with what I call the global monster template. In cultures all over the world, you have dragon-like monsters, you have these hairy ape-like creatures, you have monstrous birds, monstrous demonic dogs, mysterious big cats, and also little people, goblins and things. And I think it's just semantics. It's just another word for these creatures that can enter our world from their world.
That's really interesting, because last week we had John Horgan on with us, who's sort of a local guy for us, and not too far from the studio that I'm in currently. There's a place that's referred to as the Bridgewater Triangle. In there, there's everything from black dogs, right? You know, the monstrous black dogs, to, you know, thunderbirds, sort of the American answer to, you know, like giant birds and all that stuff. And there's also there's Sasquatch reports, you know, UFOs, all sorts of stuff like that. And I asked this question to him, and I kind of like how you put it with the global monster template, because I was saying, you know, a lot of this stuff isn't mutually exclusive, right? You know, this is stuff that's been around forever, you know, like sort of the sort of resurgence of humanoid canines or whatever, you know, or, you know, if you want to just tag on the term werewolf, even though it has a lot of baggage with it, you could. But the thing is, a lot of this stuff just isn't new, you know, it's sort of just interpreted via the culture, right? So it's fascinating that now that I'm considering that term, that a lot of this is just a part of the human experience, right? So we interpret the phenomena through cultural, sort of our cultural eyes, or the perspective that we've gained through our culture, which I would say we would appropriate the phenomena. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Because werewolves, in actual medieval legend, if you look at the legend of werewolves, they're nothing like the dogmen or werewolves that are seen today. A werewolf in legend is a person that transforms entirely into a wolf that is indistinguishable from any other wolf, perhaps except by weird behaviour. And these sort of wolf-man hybrids, which are a creation of Hollywood, really, they're pretty much unknown in folklore. In folklore, the werewolf looks like any other wolf, and it could have had its origins in rabid wolves, because wolves usually avoid people, but a rabid wolf might attack someone. or attack livestock or attack humans and bite them and then pass on rabies. So the human would start frothing at the mouth and attacking people. And in medieval times they believed that was a curse.
That's a really interesting point. I listened to this lecture a long time ago on sort of like ancient cosmology, right? So how the sort of ancients viewed things, and there was a really interesting this really interesting dynamic that was brought up a lot, and that was the idea of order versus chaos. And so everything outside of civilization was chaos, and everything inside of civilization was order. And so in this instance, it's you have something that's outside of civilization, a monster or something like that, right? Something that's monstrous is something on the fringes of society, whether it be a predator of some sort. This sort of significance of religious significance is put on a lot of this stuff. And I'm going to move this slightly back because I really want to talk about lake monsters. In terms of dragons, right? You have Saint George, right? Who murders a dragon and becomes essentially a saint, and essentially creates the first gargoyle, at least in medieval folklore, right? Because he takes the head of the dragon, and he puts it on the church, and it's supposed to kind of freak all the other dragons out. But it's oh, I'm sorry.
Saint George didn't do that. Saint George. Born in Libya, above a fuller's shop, and I think it was in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. During his lifetime, he was never associated with dragons. That was something that was tacked on much, much later.
Oh, okay.
Originally, he had a job providing pork to Roman legion, and they found out he was stealing this pork, so he was basically chased out of town. And later, he joined this sect of Christians that didn't believe in the divinity of Christ. And because Christianity, its favour waxed and waned under the various emperors, sometimes he was in favour and sometimes he wasn't. But at one time he was desecrating pagan temples and taxing people so much that they tried to lynch him, and he had to be locked up for his own safety. But in the end, he ended up getting lynched and killed and thrown into the sea. Later, when this heretical part of Christianity, this heretical sect, was reabsorbed into the main body of Christianity, he became a martyr and a saint, and they sort of tacked on the dragon thing. And they got the idea from Perseus and Andromeda, the legend of Perseus and Andromeda in Greek mythology, and that's where the legend of St. George and the Dragon comes from. The other one was a gargoyle, that was in France, and that was an aquatic dragon that came up out of the river, and instead of breathing fire, it spat water, and it drowned people by spitting water. And the gargoyles themselves are based on the creature's head and neck, because they were meant to funnel rainwater out, and that was where we get the gargoyle from. But interestingly, we think of dragons as associated with fire and breathing fire, but in most cultures they're very much linked with the element of water, and the idea of water and the ocean as chaos, and they are very much the embodiment of chaos and water, having power over seas, oceans, lakes, rivers, rainfall. All throughout the Orient, they're considered to have this power. Their breath condenses and falls as rain, and they make the tides go, and they live in and around water. I mean, even in Western legends, you will find in for instance, a lot of British dragon legends are associated with wells and rivers and lakes and coming out of the water. So it's the element of water rather than fire that is most closely linked to the dragon.
So that kind of takes us back over sort of to lake monsters, right? There's so many different types, and you have horseheads, snakeheads, undulating or not undulating, anything in that realm. Why are they so different? Is it culture based? Is it how someone sees it? What's the difference, and why are they so different?
Well, one animal can look very different depending on what view you're getting of it, what way you're looking at it from, what it's doing, how much of it is visible. but I think there are a number of different species of sea serpent. With creatures in lakes, I think most of them refer to large fish, either gigantic eels or gigantic sturgeon. That's if we're talking about flesh and blood animals. With the open oceans, all bets are off, because there's liable to be lots of large unknown creatures still lurking in the world's seas and oceans. There's an ichthyologist I know called Dr. Charles Paxton, and he wrote a paper predicting how many large unknown animals are still left to be discovered, and he calculated this on the rate of discovery of big marine animals, and he came up with around 40 large species of animals still living in the sea that we know nothing about.
I know, yeah, the first one that comes to mind for me is Architeuthis, right? You know, the giant squid when it was discovered, and you know, it's interesting because it is such a large body of water, and there's so much that we don't know about it. And I think this is true. If it's not, you know, please correct me. That we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about our own oceans. You know, either Marianas Trench kind of jumps to mind as well. You know, and so there's all this space to grow, and it's interesting because, you know, you think of lake monsters, especially, you know, there's not a ton of room. You'd think there'd be huge dents in fish populations or anything like that to support a creature that size. You know, Champ over in Lake Champlain here in the United States, Loch Ness Monster, of course, or really, you know, or Macaulay Mbembe, if you want to kind of lump him in there as well. And it's, you know, but at least in the open ocean, it's kind of hard to detect that at the very least. Usually they're kind of stumbled upon. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yes. Most of it is happenstance. And one of the most tragic stories involves a French biologist called Pierre Denis de Montfort, who lived in the late 18th and early 19th century. He was a biologist who specialised in mollusks, and he worked for the French Natural History Museum and the Botanical Gardens, and he was sent all over as far afield as Egypt collecting specimens, and he wrote many books on mollusks. And he started to talk to whalers from Nantucket who had settled in Paris, and they told him about finding great sucker marks on the hides of sperm whales and dying sperm whales vomiting up these great tentacles. And he realised this must refer to a gigantic species of squid, utterly unknown to science. And he linked this with the Norse legend of the kraken, the multi-armed animal that was said to attack ships. And he talked to a number of people that said they'd seen these things, including one guy who said he was on a ship off the coast of Angola, and they were becalmed, and so they sent people down on planks with ropes to scrape off barnacles from the side of the ship whilst they weren't going anywhere, and they were attacked by a monstrous squid which pulled several of these people over and dragged them under, and it only let go of the boat when one of its tentacles was hacked off. Now, because of this theory, Pierre Denis de Montfort became a scientific pariah. Everybody laughed at him. They thought he was an idiot for believing in sea monsters. He lost his job. He couldn't find work. He was reduced to selling seashells for a living, and finally died of starvation in a Parisian gutter in 1820.
Oh, the poor guy.
In the 1850s, he was proved right when the first giant squid was actually captured. But he was right about the giant squid all along, and he's never got any of the credit for being the guy that came up with the theory. And today he's still thought of as this pariah. And he really needs rehabilitating and giving credit for what he discovered.
Interesting. Well, I guess now is probably as good a time as any to hop into our some listener questions, and we have our always dependable Peter from down south in Colombia who writes to us. Please ask Richard Freeman, could time slips be an explanation for some cryptid cases? And if so, what cases might fit and why? And we talked about this a little bit, but if you wanted to expand on it, feel free.
Yeah, it's not my field of study, time slips, but it would explain a lot. sort of the sightings of pterosaurs, for example. Now, if pterosaurs were still around today, we'd know about it. We'd see them all the time. Just take North America, where these pterosaur-like creatures are reported from the southern states. The country is full of bird watchers who are constantly scanning the skies with binoculars. These things would be seen all the time. We'd have found where they're nesting. There'd have been documentaries made about them. You can't hide something with a 30 or 40 foot wingspan that's flying around in the sky. But people claim to have seen these creatures. So could it be that they're getting some sort of view back in time through some aspects of physics that we don't understand? It makes more sense than that there's a surviving population of neopterosaurs that have not evolved at all and are still existing completely out of time.
That is actually like a kind of land of the lost scenario in as well. And I guess we're coming up to our break. I might as well introduce the question so we can shift away from the misty waters and perhaps into the misty mountains. And I'll introduce this and give you a chance to kind of formulate a response to it, which essentially we're going to shift into Orang Pendek, which I know a wee bit about, but not a ton. So you're going to be headed to Sumatra relatively soon. Is that correct?
Yes, in about on the 14th of September. Actually, I'm going for a month. This will be my 6th expedition.
Oh wow!
Orang Pendek.
Wow, sixth expedition. Jeez. All right. Well, we'll talk about Orang Pendek when we come back from our break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno here in the somewhat warm Blackstone River Valley, and we'll be right back.
You can depend on us for public service. ON Radio.
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Well, that was a very quick break that I did not expect. Usually it's fun with automation software. Sometimes it'll pick something that's long, sometimes it'll pick something short, and in this case it picked something short. So we'll just get right back into it with our guest. So Orang Pendek, what is Orang Pendek? Why is it in Sumatra? And what is the significance of finding it?
The name means the short man. Orang means man or person in Malay. The orangutan is man of the forest. Orang Pendek is the short man. It's supposed to be a very muscular, powerfully built, but relatively short, upright walking ape, 3 to 5 feet tall. It lives on the forest floor. It's not arboreal. It doesn't live habitually in the trees like the known species of orangutan. And it's been reported ever since the colonial era. Sumatra, which is a large island in Indonesia, used to be a Dutch colony. And the British East India Company used to do a lot of trading there. So sightings of this creature go back all the way to the 18th century. And it's not just natives that are reporting it, it's Westerners as well, including a woman called Debbie Martha, who's now the head of the Indonesian Prairie Conservation Group, who saw the animal, I think, on 4 separate occasions. And there's also a British wildlife cameraman who he didn't film it, but he saw it. He saw this animal as well. So it's been deemed as one of the most likely cryptids to exist. And I've been over there on its trail for nearly 20 years now. I've found its footprints, I've found its handprints, I've heard it calling in the forest. One of my friends and the native guide actually saw the creature in a tree, and we saw it get down from the tree and walk away on its hind legs. And we got hair from it. It was analysed by a guy called Lars Thomas, who's linked with Copenhagen University. And he's an expert on mammal hair, and he looked at it and said that this animal is related to the Sumatran orangutan, but it's not the Sumatran orangutan. Now, there are 3 types of known orangutan: the Bornean orangutan, the Sumatran orangutan, and the Tapanuli orangutan. And the Tapanuli orangutan was only discovered in 2017. So what we think this is the Orang Pendek. It's the 4th type of orangutan, in my opinion. but it's one that lives on the forest floor rather than in the trees. It walks upright like a man, and most of the sightings say it's got black or dark grey hair rather than the ginger of the orangutan.
Interesting. So how do you go about hunting on your expeditions? Is there a certain method that you use? Have you changed techniques over the years? What's your process?
Well, this time around we're going to 4 new places that I've never been before. Most of the time before we were in Gunung Karinci Sablat National Park, around an area called Gunung Tuju, the Lake of 7 Feet, which is a caldera of an extinct volcano that's full of water. It's kind of lake, and there are many sightings around there. But this time we're concentrating on the lowland jungles where there have been recent sightings. So what we do, we set up camera traps fairly early on and we leave them there. Then we trek into the jungle trying to get film of the creature as well, and we leave out bait like fruit into these camera traps. We look for hair, we look for field sign like footprints and handprints, and we also interview witnesses. The last time I was over there, we got the biggest group of orang pendek witnesses that have ever been brought together, and they're remarkably consistent in their stories about this small, powerfully built animal. It's not aggressive, but they're frightened of it when they see it because it has a very human look about it, and it frightens them.
That's really interesting. Now, is there any folkloric significance to the locals in any way?
Not really. They don't attach. They don't attach any mystical powers to it. But in the same area, there are other creatures. There is a race of pygmies they call the Orang Kardil, the tiny people, and they insist that they're different from the Orang Pendek. They say that they're more human-looking, they're more slightly built, and they're a lot less hairy. They have long hair on the head, but they're a lot less hairy in the body, and they hunt with bamboo spears. And an old guide of mine, sadly he's passed away now, called Sahar, he said that his father, who was also dead, back in 1981, had been on a trading trip with a friend of his, trading rice for the goods in remote villages, and they were camped out in this very remote area, this mountainous area of Karinci Sablat National Park, and they said they were cooking some rice, and this tiny little man came out and started stealing the rice from the pot. So Sahar's father's friend killed it with a parang, which is similar to a machete. And they said that all of a sudden, out of the jungle came lots of these little people with bamboo spears and speared Sahar's father's friend to death, but didn't attack Sahar's father. And we think that these might be related to Homo floresiensis and Homo lutzinensis, the two tiny hominids that have been discovered recently, the hobbit people from Flores, and more recently discovered and very closely related species from the Philippines, which are known from skulls and teeth and jaws and bones. And it looks like they're a sister group to Homo habilis, which is a hominid from East Africa, from the fossil records, that was supposed to have died out 1.9 million years ago, and we had no idea that it left Africa. But it seems to have this lineage of descendants nearly 2 million years out of time and half the world away from where it should be, which begs the question, what else is out there?
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, if there's a tribe of pygmies just floating around there, I would imagine that there's who knows what else is out there. Now, is there any sort of are there any anthropologists that are looking into this? Do they care? Yeah,
the guy called Gregory Paul, who's written 2 very good books, Images of the Wild Man in Southeast Asia, and more recently this one here, Between Ape and Human, which is Between Ape and Human by Gregory Paul, and that's about his investigations on the Indonesian island of Flores, which is a long thin island in Indonesia, And that is the island where Homo floresiensis was discovered, the subfossil bones of Homo floresiensis. And to this day, the tribes in the east of the island, in the mountains, swear that there's this little ape-like creature about a metre tall, whose description sounds just like the reconstructions of Homo floresiensis. And it's still living in the jungles and the mountains of eastern Flores. And this book, written by a professional anthropologist, absolutely fascinating.
That is really fascinating. I want to get myself a copy of that, Between Ape and Human. That's so interesting, because it's we like to think we know everything, and it's especially here in the modern world. It's like, okay, cool, we already know everything. Everything's discovered. Whatever. What sort of do you have any response from mainstream zoology in this department? Do you present anything to them, or is it just kind of not even worth it?
Yes. Before his untimely death, I worked with a geneticist from Oxford University, Professor Brian Sykes. Sorry, I'm terrible with remembering names. Professor Brian Sykes, who was looking into samples of hair from various hominids around the world. I worked with him. I worked with Lars Thomas from Copenhagen University, his colleagues in the genetics department. He's a hair expert, but he has friends in the genetics department. So I'm very open to working with mainstream zoologists and mainstream scientists. And the way forward, I think, is genetics, is DNA. There was a very interesting case from 2018 where a British zoologist went into the Himalayas. He was called Mark Evans, and he went into Bhutan in the Himalayas, searching for the Yeti. And they took with him Dr. Eva Bellarmine, who was a French geneticist, and they took some water from a pool in the mountains where animals came to drink. And they looked for environmental DNA in it. That's when animals leave their DNA in an environment by walking through it or moving through it, and they slip off cells and things. So if an animal comes to drink, for example, from a pool, some of the cells from its mouth will go into the water. If you take samples of this water, you might be able to see what animals were drinking from it and identify them. And they identified a very rare, very large species of wild sheep that had been unknown in the area before. But they also isolated some primate DNA. And this primate DNA shared something like 99% of its genetic makeup with human beings. So whatever left that was a primate that was closer to man than a chimpanzee. And I actually tracked down Dr. Eva Bellarmine and I communicated with her via email. And she told me that she didn't retain the sample afterwards. It was retained by this company called Spygen, which is a French genetics company. Spygen sounds like something out of a James Bond film.
It does sound like that, yeah.
She didn't own it, but if it was still in existence, it would be on a shelf somewhere in their laboratory. So I got a friend of mine, Christopher Killian, who's a French cryptozoologist, and he wrote to Spygen saying, look, we've got people that want to do more work on this. We've got Copenhagen University ready to go on it. We want to do more genetic testing on this sample. And they said, well, we can't give it to you because it's not legally ours. It belongs to somebody else. So he wrote back saying, well, can you put me in touch with whoever legally owns this sample, because it's really important that we do further work on it. It could be a whole new species of higher primate. And they wrote back saying, we can't anymore because the sample has been destroyed.
So here's a... Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, make of that what you will.
Well, I guess it makes sense, A
conspiracy theorist would say, oh, they're destroying it because they don't want anybody to find out that the Yeti exists and it's closely related to man because it'll freak out right-wing religious nuts, or it'll cause ruptions in big business because they'll have to protect the areas that it's found in. But just as equally, it could have been done through laziness and incompetence.
Yeah, I mean that happens more often than not, unfortunately. Or if there's routine, maintenance or whatever, like we have all these samples from whenever, we can't really hold on to it, something to that effect. The first question, let's say from a naysayer. Well, actually, first before we hop into that, let's what are you working on next? Now you're going to Sumatra relatively soon. You working on any new books? Anything coming down the pipeline?
Well, I've just finished that book, The Highest Strangeness, which is deep strange Fortean cases from all aspects of Fortean, and that should be out next year. I'm not working on another book at the minute. I'll be writing up my expedition notes when I get back from Sumatra, so they will be appearing in some form or other. And whilst we're over there, I was looking for the orang pendek and the orang codhill. There's another creature in the same forest that the local people call the chigao. They say it's a big cat, smaller than a tiger but larger than a leopard, highly aggressive. It has sort of sandy-coloured fur, a slight ruff like a lion's mane around the neck, but not as big as a lion. The front legs are longer than the back legs, so it gives it a sloping back, rather like a hyena. It has a short tail like a lynx, and the canine teeth are very long and hang down, which sounds just like a saber-toothed cat.
It does.
The neighbouring island of Java, fossils of Homotheus, a group of saber cats called Homotheus, from only 10,000 years ago. But a sighting of this creature, the chigao, can throw a whole area into panic. They're terrifying.
So, that is actually really interesting. Imagine if there was some sort of descendant of a saber-toothed cat or something just out there. I guess it's really one of those things where you'll have somebody say okay, well there's no bodies found. You have a couple hair samples, whatever. How come we're not finding any bodies? Now my logic would be things decompose very fast out in the wilderness. But if somebody comes up to you and says, "Well, why haven't you found a body?" Right? What would your response? What would your response be?
Because corpses get eaten very fast, and not just the meat. The bone gets broken down as well. Rodents chew the bones for the calcium in them. Fungus breaks them down. I mean, I've been down to Sumatra for years, and I've found 2 skeletons of tapirs that were killed by tigers, and there was very little of them left, just a few bits of the jawbone and teeth. So if you're talking about something as elusive as an orang pendek, the chances of finding a dead one before it gets eaten by something are almost zero.
So I guess we can take a little trip north to kind of round out the show, talk about one of my favorite cryptozoological creatures, which is the Mongolian deathworm. And your research into the Mongolian deathworm is typical of your very careful and feet on the ground research. So rather than fire-breathing dragons like we were talking about earlier, you sort of say have the theory that it could be some sort of burrowing reptile. Have you made any sort of new discoveries or had a chance to really interview anybody new, or even what is your version of the story of the deathworm?
Well, we were over there in 2005. We were going to go back to make a documentary with a film crew, but COVID put paid for that. So whether that ever happens, I don't know. I've travelled for about 1,000 miles through the Gobi Desert and talked to about 2 dozen witnesses, including an old man that had seen it back in the 1930s when he was a boy, 2 people that had seen it just the year before. And once again, we have a remarkable consistency. A creature that is shaped like a salami, reddish brown colour, sort of a brick red in colour, scaly, hard to tell which end is the head and which end is the tail. And it's usually found just lying in the desert in the Gobi. And people that see it are terrified of it. Like the Chagall in Sumatra, it can send communities into a panic. One guy said, as a boy, he had seen it when he was tending to his family's camels and goats, and he went and told his parents, and they rounded up the animals, packed up the gur, which is the circular tent they have, and moved out of the area. If a death worm's seen in an area, people will move out of the area, they're so frightened of it. Because they believe it can spit a corrosive venom that acts like acid. But when you talk to people, nobody knows anyone that's been killed by one. It's a story that gets repeated. It sounds to me from the description like either a sand boa, which is a small burrowing constriction snake, or a worm lizard, or Anthusbana, which are burrowing reptiles that are related to snakes and lizards, but are not snakes and lizards, they're an age group of their own. They match up pretty good with the descriptions of the death worm. So I think the death worm is an undiscovered large species of worm lizard or sand boa. And when I say large, I mean a metre. It's not like the things in June.
Right, yeah. It's not like we're talking about like Dune or Tremors or anything in that realm. I do think it's interesting. It's some of the claims I never quite understood if there was any sort of scientific backing for any of it. You know, like it shooting lightning or something like that, and giving.
When you talk to the people, when you talk to the nomads in the desert, they say that's folkloric. They call it throwing lightning. They say that's just folklore. They believe it's venomous and it can spit, but I think that's folklore as well. One guy, an old retired colonel who had seen one when he was patrolling near the Chinese border once, he said he saw it early in the morning and it had dew on its back, and the dew was sparkling because it was catching the light, and he said it looked like electricity playing along its back, and he thinks that's where the idea comes from, and people have seen it with dew on its back that's glistening.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. It's amazing, you know. We as humans, we really like to make stories, right? You know, it's how we sort of order reality around us, and so that would make the most sense that we have data points, right? That we work with, and so we have what we can gather really through an experience or something like that, and then we build a story out of it. On our side of sort of the unknown spectrum, with ghost research, right? So in our realm of paranormal research, it's something could fall in a room and nobody's in that room, so maybe it's a ghost, and so we have these data points that we work with, and we try to build a story out of it. We know nobody's in that room. We know nobody else is in the house, but something fell in the other room. But there's very obvious explanations. Could be a cat. Maybe there was like maybe a minor earthquake. Big truck goes by. Who knows? And at this point, in your research, especially when it comes to flesh and blood creatures that have sort of a folkloric significance, right? Kind of round out the show with this idea of folklore. How much of it can be explained sort of characteristics of a creature versus something that sort of is like an assigned significance to either it appearing or someone experiencing it?
Well, lots of familiar animals that were once unknown had all sorts of bizarre powers associated with them and behaviours. They used to think that the gorilla would tear branches off trees and use them to fight elephants, and that it would come down into native villages and carry off women to rape. And absolute nonsense, but the gorilla exists. The giant monkey tree frog from South America, native people said that its secretions had powers to make you invisible in the jungle and negate hunger and thirst. When biochemists found this creature and looked at its secretions, they found that they mask human scent, effectively making you invisible in the jungle, and that the secretions can affect you so you don't feel thirst and hunger so much. So that's a real thing. That it was just given a mystical sense to it. But sometimes it's political. One of the animals I'm most interested in, and I've been after it on 3 occasions, is the Tasmanian wolf, the thylacine, a flesh-eating dog-like marsupial from Tasmania with stripes along its back. Very famous creature. It's supposed to have died out in the 1930s. It was mercilessly persecuted by Western settlers because they believed it was killing their sheep. They went over to Tasmania, wiped out the Tasmanian Aborigines, shot them all, wiped out the Tasmanian emus, brought a load of sheep over, and they were making claims that were physically impossible for animals to do. The amount of sheep being killed in one night due to these claims were ridiculous. But there were several bounties put on this animal, and it was hunted and snared and poisoned and shot. And there was a population crash around about 1905. The last known one died in Hobart Zoo in mid-30s. But since then, there have been over 4,000 sightings, including one by a zoologist called Hans Nari. Its continued survival has been predicted by computer programs. And one of its closest relatives, the Tasmanian devil, we now know that that only needs a very small base population to breed from. It doesn't need a large population. I've spoken to people over in Tasmania, including a government licensed shooter who goes out killing the feral cats, which are a bloody menace whenever they appear. He's seen it twice. I talked to another guy who ran an arboretum, and he had a sighting with his wife in a car, and there was another load of car full of people saw it at the same time. Another guy who sadly passed away now, but in the 70s he worked on a hydroelectric plant, and he was driving with a car full of co-workers, and one of these things came out in front of the road, and they all saw it and observed it and knew exactly what it was. These are people that have no reason to lie. They gain nothing from lying. So of all the cryptids, I think the Tasmanian wolf is the one, along with the orangutan, most likely to exist.
That's really interesting, because that kind of leads into probably one of the last questions we'll probably have time for, unfortunately, which is how many of these occurrences would be animals that are presumed to be extinct versus, undiscovered creatures?
Goodness, that's a good question. A lot of them are creatures that are completely unknown to science because we know from the description they're not like anything else. Fewer, I think, are survivors of things we think are extinct. I don't think there are any non-avian dinosaurs, for example. There are plenty of dinosaurs that have feathers and say tweet, right. It's birds, but I don't think there are any surviving non-avian dinosaurs. But things that were extinct more recently, or supposedly extinct, like the Tasmanian wolf, well, certainly. There's a type of leopard called a Zanzibar leopard, which was found on some islands off the coast of East Africa, thought to be extinct since the 60s, and Zanzibar is much smaller than Tasmania, with a much bigger human population, much less wilderness, and the Zanzibar leopard survived. More recently, we found the night parrot, which was thought to have been extinct for decades and decades. No one had seen one in, goodness knows, something like 50 years. And that turned up in Australia. So these things have been found all the time. And new species are turning up all the time. New species of tapir from South America, new species of manatee. So I cover a lot of that in my latest book. My latest book here is In Search of Real Monsters. And that's the Tasmanian wolf there on the front. And it's the second part of a 2-volume series on cryptozoology. And in this I look at the possibility of prehistoric survivors and extinct animals surviving, like the giant ground sloth and the Tasmanian wolf and the Macaulay Bembe. I look at giant animals like giant crocodiles, of which there are stories from all over the world, some hair-raising, amazing stories of crocodiles far bigger than anything known to science. Giant anacondas and giant pythons. And then in the second half of the book, I recount all my adventures going all the way around the world searching for the yeti, the Tasmanian wolf, the giant anaconda, the Mongolian deathworm, all of these strange creatures, right up until my last expedition, which was in 2018, in Tajikistan, searching for a relic hominid called the ghoul, which may be a descendant of Homo habilis or Homo erectus. But it's all in here. All my adventures are all recounted in here. And I also give advice to people that might want to do their own cryptozoological expedition. So how do you do it? How do you set up a monster hunting expedition from scratch? All the stages of what you need to do a successful expedition.
Oh, lovely. Well, can you where can you get these books? Where can people find out more about you?
Well, In Search of Real Monsters is available on Amazon, or you could order it through any bookshop, but Amazon is probably the best place you'll get it from.
Mm-hmm.
As for me, you can find out more about the Centre for Fortean Zoology and its work by going to the website www.cfz.org.uk, or just type in Centre for Fortean Zoology. And my email is doctor3uk@yahoo.com, which is of course a reference to John Pertwee, the third actor to play Doctor Who, which is classic Doctor Who was my main reason for getting into strange creatures and cryptozoology and all this weirdness. Massive 60s and 70s Doctor Who. But the modern woke, gender flip rubbish, you can stick where the sun don't shine.
Unfortunate, but still, hey, well, thank you for being on with me, Richard. It's been a wonderful show, and hey, when you get back from Sumatra, we'll have to have you on and talk about your findings.
Hopefully, we'll have found something this time. Fingers crossed that this time we get some good hard evidence. I'd love to get some film.
Oh, I'm sure you'll find something. There's and even though it's your feet on the ground research is and your techniques. They're just I'm sure you'll come up with something for sure. But once again, thank you, and I guess it's time for us to hop right into the announcements here. And it starts off with the Exeter UFO Festival, and that's coming up next week. It returns after a couple of years actually. And it's going to be wonderful to be back in Exeter, New Hampshire. That's at the Town Hall. That's over Labor Day weekend, so September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole town gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, speakers will include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, and Valerie LaFasso, and Mac Maloney, among others. The subject of our talk will be time storms, and that's with thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. And we plan to do our traditional live broadcast from the event with a panel of the speakers. That's always a rodeo, never a dull moment, especially when it comes to remote broadcasts. But it should be a good time, and we always get some great questions from the audience. And it's going to be an all-star panel, so it'll be a lot of fun. So that's next weekend, September 3rd and 4th, in Exeter, New Hampshire, at the Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall. And you can find out more about that event. That you can visit exeterufofestival.org for more details. You can visit our show website as well. That's behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM, including those that have been restored to our archives at behindtheparanormal.com. You can also hear us you can also hear these broadcasts as well as on most major podcast platforms, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can hear it on YouTube. Anywhere where you get your podcasts, you can find us, and you can check those out as well. And we do have a show app. It's free at behindtheparanormal.com, and you can browse books at behindtheparanormal.com as well. The show app doesn't really do much, but it does get you the podcast, so if you want a direct source for it, it's all there, and you can find that at behindtheparanormal.com. You can also find our books there, along with our guest co-hosts there at our website, and you can also find out more about us and our cases over the years, our public appearances and how to book us, and what we're doing, and our schedules, and all that good stuff, behindtheparanormal.com. And you can also find there our charity page, which we have links to several good causes that we've adopted over the years, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, run by our good friend Tom Spitaleri, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, helping Haiti's orphans, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund. As mentioned before, next week that's September 4th, which is Labor Day weekend here in the United States. As we mentioned, we'll be doing our show live with a live audience from the Exeter UFO Festival, so don't miss it. So anybody who has done a talk there will be on the panel, and we'll be talking about a myriad of things. It's always a wide-ranging, wild ride. We always talk about a lot of different things, and a lot of people get involved with it. So I'm excited to be a part of it again this year. So today we leave you with a thought from Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, maybe. Mysteries create wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand. I'm Ben Eno, and my father Paul will be back with us next week for the live broadcast, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.